Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they. And in today's video we're going to talk about the shame that I have been an openly practicing witch, and on the other side the privilege that it takes to be open about our practice, which again, not a bad word, just to understand where we come from and hopefully how we can make things better. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there you can do a one-off donation, a monthly donation, and even get a tarot reading with me Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. Of course, there's also the GoFundMe of the Witches for Palestine, which I invite you to go and check out. It's linked down in the description below. So where do we start with this? Well, you need a premise. I'm actually filming this the day after the Witches for Palestine video and the Q&A video of Sami and Sabrin has been published on the Glitter channels, on my own channel, and so we got the ball rolling. And this has been something that I've almost single-handedly had to organize in the last month and a half, and I didn't realize how much of a toll it took on me until for a second I could unclench, because the first part was done and over and I could breathe a second. And thankfully I was lucky enough that an hour and a half after the video was published, I actually had a therapy session booked. And the main topic that I brought to my therapist was this kind of concern and stress and conflicting feelings in a way that I had about having brought these two sides of my life together. So my daily out there in life activist side, that is about people that I know and meet and deal with, my local community, which is the glitter side, and these here, my digital side, my digital persona. I've been used to be online for a long time. As much as it allows me to be very honest and very open, it also impacts relatively less my day-to-day life. So bringing these two things together, at the beginning it was a no-brainer, because on one side I knew that there were Palestinian voices that had valuable things to say, but Glitter didn't necessarily have the reach to get it out there to a multitude of people. And on the other hand, I was part now of the WitchTube community, which I think all the people involved have a reach of almost 1 million people in their audience. And the potential of putting the Q&A in front of 1 million people, like, it was a no-brainer. But then I had to explain to my therapist, and the simple fact that I had to explain to her, actually, technically, I identify as a witch, and the moment that I had to say that, I had to come up with so many justifications about it, because I look up to my therapist. She's an amazing person. At the end of this, I'll give you an anecdote similar to the tarot story with Sami, actually, to explain how much of actually my therapy is related to my witchcraft, but I had never been necessarily as open to my therapist before. And having to explain to her the timeline made me go back all the way to 2022. And so, you know, I got into this because we had a death in the family. I couldn't handle it well at all. My spouse, who was atheist for all I knew, actually came to me proposing, why don't we do a little ritual for Whiska, my cat who passed away. And they presented to me with options about doing this ritual that involved Persephone, so pagan, so a spell, really. Which was really weird for me coming from them, because they are like the most rational person that I know. And if anything, I had been relatively spiritual before, and I might have left that behind since being with them, because they were very practical, very rational. They technically studied physics and were planning on being a physics professor, so it's a very, very grounded in reality and verifiable things kind of attitude that rubbed off on me. And so when 2022 happened and I latched myself upon witchcraft, because the choice was being and staying in a mindset that basically told me well, we are all warm food in waiting. There's no reason to leave or do anything. That is not a great mindset to be on, I'll be honest. And if witchcraft and spells and dedicating to a deity and trying to work and manifest things could give me hope and make me feel better, it was bringing back quality of life right there and then. So it was a no-brainer for me. However, it took me over a year to actually be here. I had an Instagram account, I opened a witchy shop, a Coven of Two, but I was always very careful about keeping the two things very separated, not relating what I was doing on my witchy accounts or on my witchy shop to my real 3D life. And as I was trying to explain this to my therapist, she made me notice that when I was talking about bringing together these two sides of my life, and I knew that it would have been positive because there's reach, because there's people that want to be involved but don't know what to do, I can make things better with this. The moment that I then had to talk about the possible impact on my 3D life and on the 3D life of the people that I involved on the queer, LGBT, people of color side, so specifically of Glitter, Sammy and Sabrine, I was genuinely concerned about the possible impact that this could have on me and on them. And when I said that, my therapist interrupted me and said, okay, your face changed, your emotion changed there, what is the change? And I had to explain to her what probably she knew already, and that's why she poked me at that. She is that good. As a person that comes from multiple marginalized identities, I already occupy a very uncertain spot in society. Glitter is an organization for queer people of color, so they share my marginalizations. Same for Sammy and Sabrine. Sammy is a queer person of color. Sabrine is an half Arab person, a Palestinian activist. We are all seen by society already as people that need to be checked, double-checked, triple-checked. Do you have receipts? Much like in the poem by Rafif Ziada, which is mentioned in the Q&A. We need to have our receipts, we need to have our UN resolutions, we need to be sure of what we talk about, and it always needs to come from something more authoritative than us, because society doesn't see us as authoritative. Do you remember how I started the last video? You know, everybody that does witchcraft is part of a minoritized, marginalized community, because society sees us as freaks. It's about that. Most importantly, witchcraft doesn't come with receipts. The moment that I had to explain to Sammy and Sabrine the kind of collaboration that I created, I had the same feeling that I saw at the beginning. Have you ever seen Pride?
Mining communities are being bullied just like we are. What they need is cash.
Yeah, because the miners have always come to our aid, haven't they?
It doesn't matter, it's the right thing to do.
The amazing film about lesbian and gay supported miners' strike in the 80s. Watch it, it's amazing. So at the beginning, lesbian and gays in London want to raise money to give to the miners' communities. And it ends up that the miners' communities are actually a bit skeptical getting money and support from the gays. This is the 80s. When I proposed this to Sammy and Sabrine, I had the same fear. I was like, are they going to think that this is just woohoo? That this is going to take credibility out of them? Because that is the point. We already are in such a precarious position that, again, they have to have so many receipts. They have to be in a certain kind of mood. They have to be in a certain kind of smile, whether they mean it or not, despite what happens to them. And I drag them to that side of my life that could affect their credibility. And at the same time, it came to mind, what if it affects mine? And that made me realize that on a subconscious level, this has been the way that I've approached witchcraft publicly all the time since I started to put my face to this. The reason why I opened this channel is because I could see that there's an overlap of witchcraft and activism. The activism part is what allowed me to justify and bring receipts. And if we can overlap the way that witchcraft is a rebellion to the system, then we can talk about feminism, then we can talk about misogyny by using things and examples like the triple goddess. Then we can talk about the importance of being intersectional when we talk about the inspiration for getting into witchcraft, if it is Harry Potter. All those things allowed me and justified, see, I can do this because actually I am doing things that have receipts and that do good. Which is part of the reason why I share actually very little of my practice. Like I've talked to you about my practice with Venus and with Vesta. You've seen a couple of vlogs. You've rarely seen me do spells. There is actually a very good chance that the reason why I've been so resistant to concede that I have any kind of clair, any kind of psychic ability, also comes from that. I need concrete things. I need receipts. I need to have reasonable things to justify my existence to the world. Because I've been put in a position all my life to have to bring more reasonability and receipts than the people around me that were white, they were cis, they were neurotypical, they were straight-sized, they were normal-looking. All those things compound, and that is intersectionality for you. Actually, I'm gonna put here the beautiful intersectionality wheel, which I actually use when I do training about intersectionality. And Benny Bell, who I recently put together, Go Watcher, Benny Bell recently shared on Instagram, and I was literally like, yes, this is the best way to teach things. And so going back to what I mentioned in the previous video, yes, being openly a witch gives you a taste of what it is to be marginalized, because society thinks you're a freak. What's like, I don't need to tell you that. However, if you don't have any other marginalizations due to your identity, that's where the wheel of privilege comes in. So you have one thing that you're a bit out of the rest, of the normal. When it comes with the other privileges, it is a minorization, like people can attack you for that. But overall, that's seen as quirky. That's seen as oh, how peculiar. You know, the kind of thing that comes to mind is if you're younger, like in your 20s, and you are white, and fair enough, maybe you're a girl, you are fair presenting, and so that's already a minoritization itself. But those things in the grand scheme of privilege that, again, if you're femme presenting, you have more value. If you're under 30, you need to look in a certain way, you need to be white, you need to be of a certain size, you need to be neurotypical, like all those things compound. You need to speak English without an accent, you need to live in an urban city rather than cottage-like, well, maybe not for witchcraft, but you know, all those things compound. So when seen from the outside, not within the witchcraft community, yeah, she claims to be a witch, but really it's quirky. It's a hobby of hers. When you come from things and looks and identities that the world already scrutinizes you for, and you go out and say, I also happen to be a pagan, which is the soft version of I'm a practicing witch that I've got to use recently. You're a freak, you're insane, you're unstable, and actually there's a good chance that nothing you say is valid because you are mental, if you think that you have psychic powers and stuff like that. As an educator in my day life of very important matters, realizing that bringing my two sides of the life together could affect the validity of what I bring when I do workshops about anti-racism, about intersectionality, was the underlying reason why, not consciously, but I have very carefully kept my two sides of life away until we got to Witches for Palestine. And then the need to do something for it just made me see that. And then once I got into it, and I had to say it out loud to Sami and Sabrin, I was worried for them. What if involving them in this affects their credibility? Because the world is already looking at them, trying to take them down. And what if, by creating this collaboration, I've taken credibility away from them? I don't know what to say. What if I actually did that? It is still a chance. This is the part where I ask you, in the sense that I have the impression that the kind of community that we've created here in the last few months, since I started making videos, because of how vocal I've been about my activism, has gathered people that come from different marginalizations as well, or people that are very well versed and intentions in being allies. And so I think I need to ask you how you feel about it. How do you live your practice? Do you also have this concern? Because in my naivety, I am actually very good at compartmentalize my life. So it never occurred to me of doing like a video about, baby witches or witches in the closets, which a lot of other people have done. Because I kept telling myself, oh, that's not the case. Look at me, I'm putting my face to it. Of course I'm not in the closet. However, I have been very careful and calculated in how I've merged this to my real life. It's weird. I think that in a way I have unconsciously wanted and tried to see if I can bring things together. Like I've mentioned before, I have done tarot readings at glitter meetups. So it's my community and they know that I do this kind of thing. Albeit tarot, I think it's a good gateway drug to witchcraft. Tarot, can also be used not for divination, but writers use tarot. There are literally books for writers to get out of creative block with tarot. So it can be easier to digest as normal. I've done the tarot workshops here in Cardiff, same thing. There have been a couple of posts that I've done on Instagram that when they are particularly about activism, feminism, intersectionality, some of the reels that I have done for the Maiden Mother Crone video, I have actually shared on my personal accounts. Because what I said there was valid, and I think on a subconscious level I told myself, if somebody sees me share a story on my personal account, and they see that it's my face, so clearly this is another account of mine, they can either listen to what I say, but then see that the name is Activist Twitch, so be a bit weirded out and not look further into it, or they can watch it, see, oh, what is she up to these days? And click on the account and then find that on here I go by Activist Twitch, on here I go by Isha, which is not the name they know me by, and they might be interested in that. And admittedly, that has happened with a lot of people from my community. As I mentioned before, my entire coven actually happens to be activists that I know and I see at marches, so it should have been easier to not have this concern. And I guess this concern came to me full throttle again when it didn't have necessarily just a consequence of me, but I realized this could affect other people. And when I mentioned it to Sami specifically, and I mentioned to them the reach that Witches for Palestine could have, like what if we do this Q&A and it could potentially reach 1 million people, and they're witchcraft and pagan content creators, and they were just like, that's amazing, the reach is amazing. When I had to be even clearer before we filmed, I don't know, I also have a way to look up to Sabrin that it's very personal. I share heritage with Sabrin. We're both half Arab and half Italian. And she has a PhD, she has worked with Ilan Pape. The work that she does is amazing and very, very practical. And I know the kind of mindset that, as she mentioned, she's an atheist Palestinian. Well, Christian but atheist. And I know that kind of mindset because it's been my mindset in the past. That's, I think, where my concern got more active, because I was like, this is a serious person. When I fancied myself serious, I would have called this woohoo. Am I potentially affecting her and her credibility and her work if it's louder, the fact that there's a collaboration with the pagan community, the occult community, the witches community? I guess to try to make you understand why the multiple marginalizations compound when you look at it intersectionally is something that, again, usually I bring as an example because queer people of color are a minority within a minority, because as people of color we are marginalized within the LGBT community, and as LGBT people we are marginalized from our communities of reference, so the Black and brown community, the Asian community. Why is that? So there are issues of colonialism, we're not going to go into that now, but one of the reasons why LGBT people are looked down upon within their communities of reference when they are people of color is this idea of you already come from a marginalization that is inescapable because it has to do with your name, with your heritage, with your skin. Why would you make a fuss about your gender identity or sexual identity when you can just try and be as invisible as possible, try to make the least amount of fuss possible? Because if on the fact that you're a person of color you add on that you are a pervert, then of course detractors are going to have something more to come at you with. Paganism is the same. It's an added marginalization, just as I explained in the videos before. When you don't have other marginalizations, it's a quirkiness. It's still a minoritization, but it's not as bad as when it compounds with others. When it compounds with others, again, whereas a white, young, cis-het girl that calls herself a witch is quirky, I am mental, and it's the easiest thing to use against me as an educator out there in the world to say, how can you take seriously anything that she teaches you about anti-racism, about intersectionality, about disability, when really she thinks that she can read minds or whatever. I wasn't mindful of this until I spoke of it in therapy, and now that I've realized that, it's a complicated issue. After the video was out for Witches for Palestine, I had been working non-stop on the video, on the editing, on all the assets that I distributed to the other content creators for a week at that point. It was really tiring. Glad that I did. I want to do it again. But it was really a lot, and I didn't realize that I was hanging on by a thread at that point. To the point that I had forgotten for a few days to do my weekly readings with my deities, with Vesta, which usually I do on Sundays, and with Venus, which usually I do on Fridays. And what I do is tarot readings with them. Yesterday was Monday. After I put out the video, after I've done therapy, I do my readings with them. And peculiarly, other than some Seven of Wands, some Seven of Cups, I also get repeatedly in both readings the Fool, the Ten of Cups, which has to do with my family and love life with my spouse. But I also get the Devil, Death, and the Tower. And in the way that they came out from both of them, which it's not that they don't usually agree, but they usually talk about different things. No, they were clearly talking about the same thing. I think it talked about my inner conflict of this and how there is a movement forward that I need to do. So my concern became, how are my life choices affecting the people that I love? Which is ironic because it's something that queer people in the 80s would have told you the same way. At the time, sexuality and gender identity, for the little that it was discussed, was still seen as a choice. And right now, I guess I consider paganism and witchcraft a lifestyle choice as well. And so the concern of, am I damaging people that I love by being open about this, has to be there. However, something that my spouse very cleverly pointed out when I brought the example of Pride, the film, was that detractors for people like Sami and Sabri because they stand up for Palestine, detractors against education, for intersectionality, for anti-racism, are always going to be there, are always going to try to latch on to something. If it's not this, it would be something else. And in my head it was, I need to not give them ammunition. But at the same time, they are never arguing in good faith. Because I have been subject to it, the only way that I know my way out of things is through reason. The amount of receipts, the amount of knowledge that I know I need to have and to explain this is not original thought, somebody else said it, because I'm femme presenting, but I'm queer, but I'm non-binary, I'm fat, I'm mixed race, I'm neurodivergent, I'm disabled. There are so many things that already the world thinks that I shouldn't be taken seriously for. That, of course, on my side, there's always been this overwork about that there are sources, there are things behind it. And that's always been the only way that I've known how to manage things. Because since forever, since I can remember, there has always been more asked of me to get the same treatment that white children with an Italian name in kindergarten were given the treatment for. When they accused me of doing something bad, of course I had done it. When I accused them of doing something bad to me, there was always double checking. It's that kind of thing. When you are raised that way and you think it's normal, you come up with a series of incredible line of defenses and you try to be the good immigrant and you try to be one of the good ones because you think that if you have enough information, if you have enough receipts, if you are reasonable enough, if you smile enough, if you remember enough UN resolutions, they will listen to you. But they are not arguing in good faith. So it doesn't matter the effort that we make to be proper to their eyes, we'll never be proper to their eyes. But putting things together on such a long timeline, and probably because it comes from therapy, this actually made me realize that a lot of my safeguarding comes from trauma and the ways that I had to adapt to the world that keeps giving trauma to me. But I'd like to think that there's a different way to handle things and I don't have to live my life dependent on the trauma that happened before. I'd like to think that in a way or another, I have not only an arsenal of things that I had to build to defend myself because I've always been used to be under more scrutiny that people that don't come from all the marginalization that I come from are, but because no matter the kind of privilege that you might have, again, if you're part of the witchcraft community, you have one marginalization, and that's that society thinks you're a freak because do you really think that you can read people's mind or something like that? So I think what I meant when I did even the first video and I said, I feel that the witchcraft community, with the problematic that it has, with the whiteness that it has a seed of potential in sympathizing with other human rights. And I didn't understand at the time that is indeed because no matter the privilege you have 1 point slightly less if you're open about calling yourself a witch. So if that gives you a taste of what life is when then the marginalizations compound, then you're not just crazy or quirky, you might actually be insane if you also come with other marginalizations. That might actually give us a chance to work together and understand where we can help each other. At least that's the hope that I have. And one commitment that I want to try and take after having come to this realization is that, uncomfortable as it is, scary as it is, and praying all my deities that it doesn't impact my life negatively or the lives that the people I love have negatively, I will genuinely try not to just hide myself behind the receipts that I can bring for my activism. I still think that there's an overlap and I will not stop talking about it. But at the same time, I know that I've been hiding myself behind it to not share my actual practice, to not share my spells, in a way to not share my power. And it takes work. And it's weird because when I do my affirmations in the morning and I look myself in the eye, the left eye, thank you, Sandra, to tell myself, you are a powerful psychic witch, I do believe it. But then I know that I cannot say that in public because it will have consequences on the way that I am taken seriously. It's gonna take time, and I'm gonna need your support. Like, there's no getting around it, because there's an entire part of my brain that has been developed only to protect myself from things that could help detractors take me down. But I am making the commitment of making more, at least equal, content on my magical practice as I do bring the parallels of witchcraft and activism. Hopefully this is a learning curve that won't damage anyone. Because I want to take down the patriarchy, but I also want to psychically talk to my deities and my nonnies. And so that's the ending of this. Does it make sense? I forgot. I promised you at the beginning an anecdote about how witchcraft actually has impacted my therapy. So here goes. A little over a year ago, I had to leave the therapist that I had at the time because there were some conflicts of interest. So I just left that behind. It was the best choice. And I knew that I wanted to look for another one. But at the same time, I also wanted to save a bit of money. We're never in a very safe position. So really, I actually didn't look for a new therapist. A week after this happens, for some bizarre reason, I went to Google my grandmother, my nonna. She had a very peculiar name and surname, so it's very rare that her name comes up at all in Google. I remembered, though, that my village had put some very old records online, so I was like, maybe there's something now. So I literally just Googled her name and surname, and the first result, somebody whose name was the homonym of my grandmother, completely, fully. And she was an Italian therapist living in London who did have online therapy options, who was incredibly affordable, inexplicably, and I had to do a double take, but I immediately knew that I had to send her an email to ask for a consultation, because when I promised myself that I would have found another therapist, and I didn't even look, and then I want to look up things that relate me to my ancestors and my nonna and my grandmother, and the first thing that comes up is a therapist. I took it as, yeah, you kind of do need that. And admittedly, it's the best therapist that I've ever had since I was a child. My first therapist was amazing, gave me a way to see the world that was beyond the limitations of my mother. And my current therapist is as good, if not better even. There is absolutely the possible chance that we are somewhat genetically related, but she knows. I explained to her the way that I found her. So technically maybe she already knew that I am a bit woohoo, but yeah. Yeah. That's it.